Okay, so Peter Fonda grew up under huge amounts of stress, and then he started having this trouble gaining weight, and his parents became concerned, so they took him to the doctor, and the doctor didn't know to interpret that as being a stress problem.
That's right.
So his prescription was a medical procedure which was highly traumatic for Peter Fonda. It was an expensive medical procedure because they misinterpreted that behavioral sign.
That's right, yeah.
And that seems to be a very common problem in medicine right now,
Yeah, it is.
which hasn't been really addressed.
That's right, yeah. Right, yeah.
So we'll be exploring that a little further.
Well, the answer can be found right here, free.
Yep. And we're going to be communicating that to people.
That's right.
People have no idea. I had no idea.
That's right, yeah.
A lot of people have no idea.
That's right, yeah.
So, so this line of thinking and inquiry suggests to us that many of our problems are behavioral signs of too much stress in people.
Right, yeah.
Drug addictions, engaging in out-of-control sex.
Absolutely, yeah.
And just to insert a little bit more evidence that comes from another place, I saw that the President of the United States right now is considering a program to educate children on on sex education and on the value of abstinence.
That's right, yeah. Just saying, yeah, right.
Which makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
But also, it would seem to be a good idea to insert in there a lot of education about the connection between stress and depression and sex.
Right, yeah.
Because I've collected a lot of studies which indicate that children who have been abused sexually become hyperactive. They develop hyperactive interest in sex.
Yeah, tragic.
And that may be because when you're sexually abused, you then often develop depression, and you can develop manic symptoms also.
Sure.
And one of the symptoms of mania, or one of the manic symptoms is a hyperactive interest in sex. So, and then one child can get that hyperactive interest in sex, and then they can involve a lot of other children in sex.
Right, yeah, right.
So it's kind of like behavioral contagion.
Yeah, sure.
So they don't need to all have too much stress, but if just one of them is sexually abused and then it's not treated, they can develop a hyperactive interest in sex, and then one, for example, one boy, child, can get a lot of other kids involved in sex.
Right, yeah.
He'll be motivated to feed alcohol to the girls.
That's right,
to try to get them to have sex.
That's right, yeah.
Or a girl that's been sexually abused can develop this hyperactive interest in sex, and then she can entice boys who don't have that problem into having sex.
That's right, yeah.
So the answer for that is treatment.
That's right, yeah.
Understanding.
That's right, yeah.
So here's a couple other examples of behavioral signs of stress. Aggression is another common behavioral response to stressors. The angry words and sometimes flying fists that occur between shoppers at a crowded sale or motorists in a traffic jam testify to the role of frustration, conflict, and other stressors in triggering aggressive behavior.
That's right.
All too often, this aggressiveness is directed at members of one's own family.
Yeah. Tragic.
Yeah.
Very tragic.
For example, violent behavior toward family members is particularly likely in those who not only face numerous stressors, but whose learning history includes exposure to aggressive stress reactions in childhood, often as victims of abuse by their parents. Aggressive responses are also more likely when people try to blunt the impact of stressors with alcohol or drugs.
Yeah. Right.
And that may be because alcohol and drugs are stressors in themselves.
Right. Yeah. They are.
Yeah, they create a huge. Alcohol is like liquid stress.
It is. Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
It's depressant.
Yeah, it's a depressant, and then it's also poison
Oh yeah. Sure.
to every cell in the body.
That's right. Yeah.
So it whips up the body to release more stress chemicals.
That's right. Yeah.
Then drugs, as we mentioned before, work by triggering the release of stress chemicals.
That's right. Yeah.
And most kids, I don't think they know that.
No, they don't. They don't realize it.
Yeah.
No.
So many researchers have found that unemployment, inadequate pay, job dissatisfaction, and other stressors are associated with increases in the rate and severity of domestic violence. And let's just mention that this is why I believe that universal health insurance is mandatory to reduce violence in America. Because all those people that don't have health insurance,
Yeah.
they get sick, and then it just increases stress in themselves and in their whole family,
Yeah.
and that can increase violence, which the violence then affects a lot of other people.
That's right. Yeah.
The police have to go in and deal with it, and such. Okay, now here it talks about burnout and post-traumatic stress disorder. Physical, psychological, and behavioral stress responses sometimes appear together in patterns known as burnout and post-traumatic stress disorder. Burnout is a gradually intensifying pattern of physical, psychological, and behavioral dysfunction in response to a continuous flow of stressors. Burnout typically begins with normal reactions to the conflict, frustration, and pressure of one's job, especially such high-stress jobs as police work or air traffic control.
Yeah.
But these reactions eventually become so severe as to impair functioning at work. The stress reactions can become so general that the person may appear to have developed a new personality on and off the job. Previously reliable workers or once attentive spouses may become indifferent, disengaged, impulsive, or accident-prone. They may miss work frequently, oversleep, perform their jobs poorly, and become irritable, suspicious, withdrawn, depressed, and unwilling to talk about stress or anything else.
Right.
Because their problem develops gradually, people who suffer from burnout frequently fail to seek assistance. Attempts by family and friends to help may be met with aggressiveness, especially if alcohol or drugs are involved. College students sometimes display stress reactions similar to burnout from the pressures of heavy course loads, part-time jobs, constant deadlines, and a competitive atmosphere. So I thought that was critical because when we talk about burnout, and it sort of factors into our discussion about universal health care, because the people who have to deal with all of this, the people without health care who are overloading on stress and self-medicating with drugs and alcohol, you know, the police, they're sort of like they deal with what we don't deal with as a society.
That's right.
And so they themselves can develop this burnout, and it's been my observation that a lot of police officers have that burned out personality.
They sure do. Right, yeah.
Which is unfortunate.
I was a chaplain of the police department in Montebello for a long time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, right.
So you heard about all of their stresses.
Oh, yeah, right.
So what did you see?
That's right. Yeah.
What did you see there?
They're under constant stress, actually. They are, yeah. Yeah.
So when we're examining our policies in America, such as universal health care, or in the current debate, they're debating whether or not they're going to drastically cut social services and health care to the
right,
poor.
yeah.
We need
Or
to keep
turn it over to the faith-based organizations. See, that's it. We got 300,000 churches in America, see.
Mhm.
Those are the faith-based organizations. And it's been proven that they can handle the problems of stress and alcohol and all these other problems better than the social service workers that are not connected with the church. Of course, some of them are connected with the church too, you see. But if we can just get people to get with the spiritual values in the Bible and the church, their lives will be better every way, and healthier, and overcome tension and stress and disappointment and sorrow. The Bible, the answer's right here to every problem that man has, see.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and that's what we're going to be
That's right,
helping people to see by getting these great minds
That's right, yeah.
together
That's right,
with the solutions
That's right, yeah.
and having people generally understand these connections.
That's right, yeah, sure.
So now we get to how what you're saying can be implemented more effectively, hopefully. How stressors are interpreted. The effects of perceived control on responses to stress are just part of a more general relationship between cognition, how people think about stressors, and the impact of stressors.
Right.
As discussed in Chapter 5, perceptions of the world depend on which things people attend to and how they interpret them. Of course, the influence of cognitive responses weakens sometimes as stressors become more extreme. A bomb going off next to you will probably not be any less stressful if you think of it as fireworks. Still, even the impact of natural disasters or major stressors such as divorce may be less severe for those who think of them as challenges to be overcome rather than the end of the world. Evidence for the effects of cognition on stress responses comes from both laboratory experiments and surveys. In a classic experiment, Lazarus and his colleagues showed 3 groups of students a film containing graphic scenes of bloody industrial accidents. The intensity of students' physiological arousal during the film depended on how they had been instructed to think of it. Those told to detach themselves mentally were the least affected. So I think that's an example of So how I wanted to make that point, and it's connected to the Bible because how we interpret things depends on our understanding of them.
Yeah.
So the Bible, for an example, would be the last words of Jesus while he was alive, according to the Bible, was, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do."
That's right, yeah.
So if I have that in mind when somebody does something against me, then I'm going to have a different reaction to it than if I don't have that in mind and I interpret it as a direct attack.
That's right, yeah. Right, yeah.
So now here's another very important aspect of health which is talked a lot about in the Bible. And it's called social support.
Yeah.
If you have ever appreciated the comforting presence of a good friend during troubled times or had to endure a bad experience on your own, you can probably vouch for the importance of social support in tempering the impact of stressful events. Social support consists of resources provided by other persons, friends and social contacts on whom you can depend for support form your social support network. The support may take many forms, including giving assistance in dealing with stressors, such as helping with car trouble, money problems, or other daily hassles, and buffering the impact of stressors by providing companionship, ideas for effective coping, and reassurance that one is cared about and valued, and that everything will eventually be all right. Thus, even when social support cannot eliminate stressors, it can help people to feel less anxious, more optimistic, more capable of control, and more willing to try new ways of dealing with stressors. So, those ideas are, it seems to me, what the prescription is in the Bible.
That's right. That's right.
Supporting, bearing one another's burdens.
Right, yeah. Love your neighbor as yourself.
Love your neighbor as yourself.
Do unto others you would have others do unto you.
Yep. So when I read about social support, and I found a lot of material on how social support is connected to poor mental health,
That's right,
poor physical health,
Right, yeah.
then after I read the Bible, I could see an immediate connection.
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
So by social support, it's just putting another label on love.
That's right. You're exactly right. Right, yeah. And that's the reason that this administration is stressing the faith-based organizations. Says, get with it, you know, and support the faith-based organizations financially and every way, see. Because, yeah, and I know a lot of churches are taking advantage of that, see. Because churches always don't have the resources to do what needs to be done for all the people, you see. So,
well, you know, I think it's important to mention here and make the point that if the federal government takes, I don't know how much they take now, 30, 40% of our money.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And then they are forced to put it all into non-Christian programs
Yeah.
to pick, you know, we'll focus on Christianity
Yeah.
for the moment. Then I just read recently that 75% of Americans consider themselves to be Christian.
That's right, yeah.
So if they take all that money out of our pockets, then we don't have it to give to the churches.
That's right, yeah.
To support these types of programs.
That's right, yeah. Right, yeah.
So the federal government becomes like a splitting us off from the churches.
Yeah. Right.
So we're going to be working on that.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
Fixing that problem. Okay. The stress-reducing effects of social support have been documented in a wide range of research. For example, Andrew Billings and Rudolph Moose found that depression over major life stresses, divorce, unemployment, illness, or family conflict, was less severe among people who had more supportive social networks. In a pair of studies on undergraduate and graduate students, those with the least adequate social support networks suffered more emotional distress and were more vulnerable to upper respiratory infections during times of high academic stress than classmates who were part of a supportive network.
That's right. Absolutely, yeah.
So the Bible's all about creating supportive networks.
That's right, yeah.
Right?
Sure, absolutely. That's the Christians, the church, yeah. Yeah. Not the building. It's the people.
Yeah.
Following God and Christ and the Bible. See?
So it occurred to me that we really are not doing a very good job in America and the world of acknowledging the potential value of the Christian philosophy or the Jewish philosophy.
That's right, yeah. Judeo-Christian religion, yeah.
Or maybe even the Muslim philosophy. I haven't read it yet. But it may have some good points. It may have some good ideas in the Quran
well,
that people aren't talking about enough.
that's right. Yeah,
Some peaceful ideas in there.
That's right. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at those too. And let me just mention now that in this conversation we're focusing more on Christianity.
That's right.
But we also have a great interest in finding the same messages in
That's right. Yeah.
the other religions.
Yeah. The Koran quotes from the Bible, but the Bible never quotes from the Koran.
Okay.
See? So,
All right.
that's right.
Indeed, one team of researchers concluded that having inadequate social support is as dangerous as smoking cigarettes or engaging in other unhealthy behaviors because it nearly doubles a person's risk of dying from disease, suicide, and other causes.
That's right. Yeah, right. Yeah. Get back to the church. Get back to the Bible.
Yeah.
See? Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
The spiritual values of life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now let's read a little bit more on how stress is involved in some of our illnesses. During the 1940s and 1950s, work on the relationship between stress and illness focused on the role of psychological factors in Selye's diseases of adaptation. Particular attention was directed at bronchial asthma, high blood pressure, migraine headaches, stomach ulcers, arthritis, and other disorders associated with over-arousal of the autonomic nervous system. Official classifications of mental disorders began to include psychosomatic or psychophysiological disorders. That is, physical problems that can clearly be brought on by psychological factors such as frustration or conflict.
Sure.
Research now suggests that stressors and stress responses can set the stage for, worsen, or perhaps even cause almost any kind of physical illness, not just those that have been considered psychosomatic.
That's right. Yeah.
And now let's just remember that Billy Graham said 50 years ago
That's right. Yeah.
that all illness, all mental disorders, all sickness finds its root in sin.
That's right. Exactly right. Yeah. That's what the Bible teaches.
Yeah. So I believe in acknowledging brilliance and genius wherever it is.
Yeah, oh, I do too. Right.
So I think we've been going too long with, just focusing on maybe the experts who we consider the experts in these areas, and not, missing the boat, perhaps.
Well, we don't. Everybody doesn't need to be an expert just to read this Bible. If you know how to read,
Yeah.
you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to know theology. Just read it and pick out the great love chapter and the golden rule, and do unto others you would have others do unto you, and love one another as I have loved you. The Ten Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount. So, it's all there. It's all there. See.
Yep. Great.
That's the reason I give out these New Testaments all over the world. See?
Awesome.
Right. Yeah.
So it says one example is Alzheimer's disease, which causes severe memory loss.
That's right.
Some evidence suggests that the degeneration of the brain in Alzheimer's disease is worsened when cortisol is released during stress.
That's right. Yeah.
And then they mention a study by Sapolsky, which we read from earlier, the book Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Specifically, it appears that too much cortisol can make some neurons in the hippocampus, an area important for normal memory, more likely to die prematurely.
Yeah.
Stress responses have also been linked to coronary artery disease. The discovery of this relationship began years ago when two cardiologists, Meyer Friedman and Ray Rosenman, in 1959 and 1974 noticed that the front edges of their waiting room chairs were being worn out especially fast. It was as if patients with heart disease were always on the edge of their seats. Interviews revealed that, indeed, many of the patients displayed a pattern of behavior that Friedman and Rosenman ultimately called type A. People who display the type A pattern tend to be impatient, intensely competitive, aggressive, hostile, and nonstop workers.
That's right, yeah.
Which all those things are also symptoms of depression.
Yes, right, yeah.
So these are seem to be like interchangeable labels.
Yeah.
One group of doctors looks at it and says that's depression. Another group looks at it and says that's burnout. Another group looks at it and says that's type A.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So stress, health, and the immune system. The role, this gets into a possible connection between AIDS and stress and also any kind of infectious disease. The role of physiological stress responses in reducing the body's ability to fight disease was demonstrated more than a century ago. On March 19, 1878, at a seminar before the Académie de Médecine de Paris, Louis Pasteur showed his distinguished audience 3 chickens. One healthy bird, the control chicken, had been raised normally. A second bird had been intentionally infected with bacteria but given no other treatment. It was also healthy. The third chicken Pasteur presented was dead. It had been infected with the same bacteria as the second bird, but it had been physically stressed by being exposed to cold temperatures. As a result, the bacteria killed it.
Yeah, right, yeah.
The search conducted since Pasteur's time has greatly expanded our knowledge about how stressors affect the body's reaction to disease.
Sure.
Psychoneuroimmunology is the field that examines the interaction of psychological and physiological processes that affect the body's ability to defend itself against disease.
That's right. I agree.
Yep. The mechanisms by which the nervous system affects the immune system are far from understood, but there is evidence for both endocrine and direct neural influences. As mentioned earlier, when the body responds to physical or psychological stressors, cortisol and other corticosteroid hormones are released from the adrenal cortex. These hormones can suppress the responsiveness of the immune system, thus leaving the body more vulnerable to infection. There is even some evidence that stress-related suppression of the immune system may create vulnerability to certain forms of cancer.
Right.
I've found some studies on that too. So now here's a little bit more on social support and how it affects health. No one knows exactly how social support dampens the physical impact of stressors. One possibility is that members of a helpful social support network provide encouragement to eat right, exercise, and engage in other healthy behaviors. There is also evidence that in animals as well as humans, social contact with familiar members of one species can modulate cardiac functioning and inhibit the potentially harmful excess secretion of catecholamines and cortisol. So the social support network helps people to eat right, exercise, and engage in healthy behaviors.
Yeah.
So we might wonder if the high rate of people dying from preventable illnesses in America is an indication of families that are broken up and not mutually supportive.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So that's where the Bible prescribes an alternative.
That's right, yeah.
Which is to help each other out. You know, love your neighbors yourself.
That's right, yeah, sure.
If your neighbor, which is in your family, is getting sick, from stress and a poor lifestyle, if you love them as yourself,
That's right.
you're going to help them cure it as if it was you.
That's right, yeah. That's right, yeah. You know, you're not going to hate your neighbor. You're not going to curse your neighbor. You're not going to do anything that harms your neighbor in any way. Yeah.
Okay, the next thing I'd like to read from is an incredible book I found from 1949. It's called Psychosomatic Medicine, the Clinical Application of Psychopathology to General Medical Problems. And it's by Edward Weiss, M.D., Professor of Clinical Medicine, Temple University Medical School, Philadelphia.
Wonderful.
And O. Spurgeon English, M.D., Professor of Psychiatry, Temple University Medical School. And let me just say a little bit about him beforehand. They're very well known in the field of medicine, and the idea that Spurgeon English has is that all of these physical health problems and mental health problems could all be seen as having one underlying cause. And sometimes their way of thinking is referred to as the unification theory of illness.
I see.
That you can unify everything into one package of understanding.
Interesting.
So he starts out the book with a quote from Plato, which says, "For this is the great error of our day, that physicians separate the soul from the body."
But thank God more and more are coming back to the spiritual values. More and more physicians.
Yeah.
And psychologists and psychiatrists. Right.
Yeah, because we're getting a better understanding of that.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, so now here he's quoting from somebody from Scotland who at the time was considered a major expert on stress and illness. It says, "Halliday, regional medical officer in the Department of Health for Scotland, believes there is a definite increase in psychosomatic illness. He points out that the presence of psychosomatic illness in a community is not revealed directly in its morbidity statistics, but lies concealed under a number of different medical labels. Some of these diagnostic labels are gastritis, rheumatism, heart disease, and debility." I guess that was a word they used in the past.
Cut it off a minute.
Of 335 unselected, carefully studied, insured patients, it was found that approximately half of them were incorrectly designated by the labels just mentioned when they were actually suffering from a psychoneurosis.
My goodness.
So that's sort of it seems to me that that's a critical idea.
Yeah.
These people here are looking beyond the surface symptoms
Right, yeah.
at what are the underlying causes.
Thinking outside the box.
Yeah,
That's right.
exactly. Which is what we're trying to do.
That's right,
Think
yeah.
outside the box. So Halliday stresses the need for recognition of the psychological factor and deplores a continuation of routine mechanistic treatment. I think by mechanistic he means pills, expensive procedures.
Yeah. Right.
He says, quote, "If the need for supplementing the ordinary examination of the teaching schools with an investigation into psychological factors is not understood, the range of clinical observations is too narrow and adequate remedial measures appropriate to each individual cannot be taken. In such circumstances, the doctor has regarded only for the secondaries, and treatment is confined to standardized mechanistic and local interference. However, insofar as this action ignores primary causes, it may be ineffective in preventing recurrences and in cutting short incapacity. Further, because of the features of innocence and increased suggestibility which are present in all patients with psychosomatic disorder, routine continuation of mechanistic treatment may succeed in fixing the symptoms for life.
Mm-hmm.
The risk of fixation is increased whenever treatment becomes very intensive, very elaborate, or very impersonal, and today, when ever-growing facilities are available for mechanistic diagnosis and therapy, there is a danger, if relevant considerations are omitted, of inducing fixation invalidism on a scale hitherto unknown. With these statements of Halliday, we agree.
Mm-hmm.
That's the authors. Treatment by drugs, by standardized mechanistic measures, or local interference by surgery for an illness which is emotional in origin only leads to a prolongation of the illness and to more confirmed invalidism.
Mm-hmm.
Fixation makes cure more difficult.
That's right.
It increases the cost of illness enormously to the patient, to his family, and to the community. Not only has it been noted that there is a definite increase in psychoneurosis and psychosomatic illness, but also that younger age groups are being affected.
Mm-hmm.
The younger a patient is who falls ill with a chronic illness that is psychological in origin, the longer he is likely to remain as an expense to a family or to the community unless it is properly recognized and adequately treated.
Mm-hmm.
This problem is a matter of the greatest economic importance when considered in the light of health insurance plans and the Veterans Administration.
Mm-hmm.
In regard to these problems, Dunbar refers to the physician himself as the pathogenic agent in certain situations. She says, quote, "It was a great step forward when we discovered that disease was also favored by elements in economic and social situations that might be traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
But
All right.
though we now know the importance of adequate housing, education, and nutrition, we still are not sufficiently aware of the fact that the physician himself is often pathogenic. He is so when he concentrates on symptoms without adequate attempt to ascertain or remove their causes."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
An example of that we read earlier would be Dr. Bennett, where he asked enough questions of the patient that he discovered that he had a conflict
Yeah, right.
with his son-in-law.
That's right, yeah.
So by asking all those questions, he identified this underlying problem
Sure. Mm-hmm.
and dealt with it. And if he had just given pills,
Yeah.
to reduce the blood pressure,
Which doesn't cure doesn't solve the problem.
mm-hmm,
That's right, yeah.
then
yeah.
then he would have
Mhm.
never, Ollie
Mhm.
would have never gone and forgiven his son-in-law
Mhm. Yeah. Mhm.
and got involved in his church.
That's right, yeah. Right, yeah.
So the physician himself is often pathogenic.
Mm-hmm.
He is so when he concentrates on his symptoms without adequate attempt to ascertain or remove their causes. His tendency in this direction is multiplied by certain insurance measures. For example, she points out that when the insurance system does nothing more than systematize existing factors, it may increase the volume of disease by increasing the volume of the wrong kind of therapy.
Mm-hmm.
If the psychological aspect of a disease is ignored and there is delay in monetary settlement, or if payment continues over a long period of time, it is likely to cause the patient to cling to his symptoms. A study made by the Industrial Health Research Board in Great Britain in 1936 concluded that, quote, "To pay a man for a psychoneurotic disability without giving him treatment in the way of psychotherapy was to push him along the downward path to complete and lasting invalidism."
That's right, yeah.
End quote. What a burden this has been to the United States in relation to disabled veterans.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So we're going to be working on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In the past few years, there's been a mass destruction of human lives arising from the outward expression of hate, fear, greed, and intolerance.
Mm-hmm.
This was from 1950,
Yeah.
50s.
Yeah.
But the internal expression of the same emotions in the individual also causes much suffering and premature death. The physician cannot wait for the world to become more civilized in order that his patients may avoid the stresses of these emotions. Rather, he must work as an educator with his patients in order to bring about better emotional adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
The freshman is told as he enters medical school, and the senior as he leaves, that the profession of medicine offers a wonderful field for doing good and making a better world.
Mm-hmm.
This is not only through the drugs he gives, the gallbladders he drains, or the tonsils he removes, worthy acts though these may be. Much of his service to humanity lies in understanding and in doing something to correct the fears and the false reasoning of the people who come under his care.
Right.
When the emotions of the patient are ignored and hate and fear are left to exert their toxic effects on the body, then medical care, for all its accomplishments, will never be truly scientific, and the financial costs will also remain unnecessarily high.
Mm-hmm.
We have previously emphasized how expensive personality conflict may be in terms of somatic symptoms, inefficiency, and asocial behavior. It also costs the family, the community, and the nation large sums of money because hatred, fear, and a faulty sense of values remain beyond the bounds of medical care.
That's right.
That's pretty powerful, huh?
Pretty powerful. That's
Right
on. Absolutely, yeah.
Re-education of the ideational and emotional trends is time-consuming and expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, it is often discovered that it would have been many times cheaper from the standpoint of both suffering and expense if it had been recognized earlier.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
The role of the general physician. But once more let us emphasize that the day is here when the general physicians should be able and willing to administer minor psychotherapy and recognize the criteria for major psychotherapy. Now and then there may be a patient whose inability to understand or whose reluctance to look within himself may cause him to go elsewhere in search of the more traditional therapies. But sincere patients will not do this. If we believe that personality problems are an important cause of psychosomatic disorders, then it is useless to compromise, to be indirect in approach, or to try to hold the patient by giving him what he thinks he wants.
Mm-hmm.
The principles of management of psychosomatic disorders are outlined for the general physician in the accompanying table.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just read a couple of these. Number 1, give the patient time to tell his story.
That's right.
Listen rather than talk,
Mm-hmm.
which that becomes hard when there's so much financial pressure on the medical establishment
Yeah, right, yeah.
to cut their visits with the patient,
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
which I've been told that that's a big problem.
It is.
Get to know the patient as a person rather than just as a medical case.
Mm-hmm.
Look for the person in the patient. Look for and explain the time relationship between onset of illness and emotionally disturbing events. Encourage discussion of personal problems, family setting, marital situation, work, social life, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Ask patients to give his own explanation of illness. Re-educate on the mechanisms of symptom formation.
Mm-hmm.
Show patient how tension of emotional origin causes symptoms.
That's right.
This is an area that's highly neglected right now in medicine.
Oh, yeah. Right.
highly neglected.
You're right.
So that's where our project will potentially get this information and these connections out to people.
Make the nation more healthy. Right, yeah.
Try to desensitize by repeated discussion against noxious environmental influences. For example, unfriendly relatives, critical employers, etc. If desensitization is not successful and modifications of environment is impossible, then change of environment is indicated.
Yeah.
So this is 50 years ago.
Yeah, 50 years ago, right, yeah. My pastor, Dr. Larry Keene, the pastor of the Church of the Valley and the Old Brown Church of the Valley, has been a professor of sociology at Pepperdine University 35 years. And he has the largest classes of any professor at Pepperdine, see. And it also is one of the outstanding preachers of America too, you see.
Really?
And because he knows the Word, he preaches the Word and all like that. But he ties it into life and health and strength and so on. He has his students, he said, I want you to go down to Watts and find a church down there in Watts and help the people in Watts, you see. That's the assignment I give to you.
Wow.
See? So
that's great. He sounds like a great person that we would want to interview.
Yes, right. Yeah,
to hear all of his ideas on this subject.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So that would probably be an example of one of the experts, one of the great teachers that we want to help America and the world become exposed to.
That's right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And
with their thinking.
Another friend of mine, Dr. Sharon Lindsay, is a professor of sociology, Christian sociology. She spent 2 years at Moscow University on a Fulbright scholarship and was in contact with every Christian religious organization in Russia and prepared a east-west directory of every Christian organization operating in Russia.
Wow.
All the countries over there. She prepared a database that has more information than the State Department has on Russia, see. And she came back from that 2 years over there and got in contact through a friend of mine, Billy Graham's, when he was over there and held this great crusade over there. He had a young couple that the man was Dima was a computer expert, and he set up the computer system in the building that Billy Graham used. They spent a year before the crusade in preparing for it, you see. So, and his wife, she was one of the interpreters for Billy Graham when Billy Graham would go meet to Yeltsin or other leaders. She was the one that translated for him, you see. And so, and when the crusade was over, and Bill Bright, who has been the Bill Brown, who's been the setup man for Billy Graham for 40 years, he leads in setting up these meetings all over the world, see. So he brought this young couple home. They immigrated to America, see. And he came to me and he said, Colonel Barber, he said, you know so many people. Said, can you find some job for this young couple, see? So I introduced them to several people and took them out to Pepperdine University and introduced them to Dr. Keene, too, and others. And so we found some jobs for them, and finally they landed a job up in San Jose, the Silicon Valley, and they were making $30 a month in Russia, see. They started Deemer out at $50,000 a year.
Wow. Wow.
And his wife has a job too. She started out at $50,000, so they are making over $100,000 a year now between the two of them, from $30 a month in Russia. So,
Well,
so those are the kind of things, you know, that I've been involved with and so on. And the Bible is the center of sociology and getting people's lives straightened out, see, not drugs.
well, you know, I'm glad you made that point, because now I think it's important for us to note that there are churches all over the world.
Right,
churches. And it's
that
sort
have
of
the answer.
That have the answer.
Have the answer right here.
Maybe they don't know how much of an answer they have.
Yeah, many other don't. See, yeah. Right.
So, in understanding this,
but this kind of thing needs to be taught in our seminaries across America. You see, in our colleges and universities, right here.
Yeah. Well, in understanding that, it reminded me of a movie that I saw once. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's called Total Recall, with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Very violent movie. Did you see that?
No, I didn't see it, but I heard about it. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's got an interesting. He ends up going to Mars, and there's a problem there because they don't have enough oxygen, and people are dying. And then there's this machinery that they discover that's in Mars, and it's been there for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it hasn't been activated yet. And so he activates it, and it creates all of this oxygen that transforms the entire planet.
Fantastic, yeah, right.
So understanding that there are these churches all over the world made me think of that, and it's like this system has been developing over thousands of years.
That's right, yeah.
Which hasn't maybe been completely turned on.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So by getting this information out to people in those churches, it could really empower them to apply their religion.
That's right, yeah, right, yeah.
As a solution.
Right, yeah, right, yeah.
And it could have a big impact on the world.
That's right, yeah, right. Dr. Lindsay, I brought her to Pacific Christian College for 2 years here. And then she went up to Fox University in Oregon. And last year, she spent 9 months teaching in Beijing University on a Fulbright scholarship, China.
Wow.
Right, yeah.
That's great.
So
we're going to empower that whole thing.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so here's one example of how that whole stress system can factor into diabetes, diabetes type 2.
Yeah.
And I wanted to read this because it shows how long this connection has been around. Again, this is from 1949, psychosomatic medicine. But these connections are not being talked about publicly much.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Which we want to correct. So it says,
only outstanding leaders like Billy Graham and Dr. Norman Vincent Peale and Bob Schuller and others like them, see.
Yeah, but unfortunately they're being tuned out.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So
right, yeah.
We're going to work on that. It says, primitive man had to have a mechanism of homeostasis, which would enable his endocrine sympathetic nervous system quickly to prepare his body for fight or flight when his physical safety was threatened. In civilized man, the same mechanism exists and apparently is called into action when man faces threats not necessarily to his physical self but to his security and prestige. One of the central factors of this homeostasis is a mobilization of the sugar in the blood leading to a hyperglycemia. It is strange that this mechanism has not been alluded to more frequently as a possible background for diabetes mellitus. It is true that emotional glycosuria and hyperglycemia due to conscious fears or threats are recognized, but it would also seem that fears and threats of which the patient is not wholly aware could, by the very nature of their unconscious energy, act as a chronic stimulus to the insulin-producing mechanism, and hence might have something to do with the development of true diabetes.
Yeah.
Flanders Dunbar, in her book on emotions and bodily changes, summarized the studies of emotional glycosuria and hyperglycemia. She referred to the classical experiments of Cannon, which demonstrated that cats, if excited or enraged, develop glycosuria. Sugar was found in the urine of football players after an exciting game and in students after a hard examination, and hyperglycemia occurs in aviators and in soldiers exposed to danger. The anxiety in some patients before operations has induced hyperglycemia. Suggestion under hypnosis has altered the blood sugar level.
Yeah.
So that's pretty old.
Yeah.
Okay, then could quote again back to Dr. Bennett's book. He says that a number of people with diabetes can have their blood sugar levels go way up without feeling any emotions connected with the process. And people with hypertension can run their blood pressure up 100 points in upsetting situations and not necessarily be able to tell they're experiencing stress, because they may not be aware of any emotional response whatsoever. So then he also says your blood sugar may be continuously up, so it can be a cause of diabetes. One day I was at UCLA Harbor General, the hospital where I teach, and I told one of my students that a certain patient we had seen together was suffering from worry diabetes. The student wrote this down and then looked up and said, "I've never seen that before. Is that a new kind of diabetes or something?" Well, it is and it isn't. To be honest, I just made up the phrase on the spot. But the relationship between stress and diabetes has been around a long time. I remember in medical school there were internists who were medical doctors, and there were psychiatrists. And they were worlds apart in terms of interests and expertise. And then there were some psychosomatic doctors who believed that the mind somehow can cause or worsen disease. The students were always a little cautious, even skeptical of them, and I know for my part I kept a distance. My view of disease was much simpler and more automatic than that. Well, you live and learn. I know I did. We doctors need to remember that people, human beings, get sick. It's not only their organs we need to know so much about. We need to know about their families and their jobs and the pressures they're under.
Right. Absolutely, yeah.
So I think that was a perfect ending.
I need one of those books to give to a friend of mine who has diabetes.
Great, okay.
In fact, he may have to go on dialysis pretty soon.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's very common for doctors to not discuss at all with their patients these connections.
He's under a lot of stress, too.
Yep.
The humanitarian organizations, of which World Vision happens to be the largest, and which I have to establish during the Korean War, they are dealing with this problem of stress and health all the time. You see, millions of people all over the world, see. And so this will be a program that we should get in their hands, you see. And they also in favor of the faith-based organizations, the church and the Bible and all like that, see. And I work with 100 other humanitarian organizations all over the world, see.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, and all of the educational material that we're creating can really empower those groups of people.
That's right, yeah, right.
And then also, plus, as the public develops a better understanding of these connections, there'll be a larger interest in investing in those projects.
Right, yeah.
Because public can then see how the suffering in other countries or in other cities affects all of us.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. I agree. Yep.
Yeah.
This all ties together.
Mm-hmm.
All ties together.
Mm-hmm. I think that as our understanding that we're discussing right now provides a argument for the importance of President Bush's faith-based initiative.
Right, absolutely, yeah.
Because it has the potential to reconnect the split between medicine and religion.
Right, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
By acknowledging the huge value in religion.
That's right, yeah.
And the value that we haven't even tapped into yet.
That's right, yeah, absolutely, yeah. It fits perfectly. Mm-hmm. Fits perfectly, yeah, right, yeah, right. Because get the Christians and the churches across America, better health. Everybody having better health. Reduce the cost of health care in America, see. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah. And by arming people with information and a better understanding, then let's say a Christian person who's telling everybody in his family, hey, if we all get along, we're going to get healthier.
That's right, yeah.
They won't be able to, up till now they couldn't say that.
That's right, yeah.
Because they didn't understand.
That's right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Plus they would sound like a lunatic.
That's right.
to their family who doesn't understand how these things are all connected.
That's right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But by educating everybody on these connections, then they'll be empowered to propose to their family.
That's right, yeah, right, yeah.
That if we all get along and follow what it says in the Bible,
that's right, yeah.
we're going to get healthier.
That's right, yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, when George W. Bush, a younger man, was drinking too much and life wasn't just going right, his father, President Bush, and his mother, they invited him to Ken Benaport for a week. And that same week they invited Billy Graham. And as he walked the shores of Ken Benaport with Billy Graham brought him to Christ. He gave up his drinking, changed his life, and has become the great leader that we now have in the White House.
Wow, so he was cured.
That's right, yeah.
Of his so-called alcoholism.
That's right, yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
And then how much did that cure cost?
Huh?
How much did that cure cost? Was it free?